Thank you so much, Mark and IGS, for this opportunity to teach and lead you all in a meditation. I'm just getting over a little cold, so just bear with me a little, but um, we've all heard and probably even said the phrase, seeing is believing. But is that so? I want to introduce you to the earliest text on Jewish mysticism. It was written about 1,000 years or so before the start of Kabbalah in southern France in the 12th century. And this is the book, just to give you a little sense of some of the diagrams that have been placed in it. But the primary teaching of this book is the creation of the world through a code. As the text in Genesis reads, and God said, let there be, whether it was light or the sun and the moon, God spoke the world into existence. And that serves as a reflection for us because we also speak the world into existence, just as I'm doing now. For today's sit, I want to introduce you to a very special teaching, which is also found in Sefer Yetzirah. Each month in the Hebrew calendar is associated with a spiritual sense. So in total, there are 12 spiritual senses. And just as our 5 physical senses inform our brains how to understand and perceive the world, our soul's spiritual senses also inform our brain how to understand and perceive the world. Yesterday was Rosh Chodesh Tammuz. Today is the second day of Tammuz. Some people added that today is the summer solstice and also International Yoga Day. So it's a special day. And in that sense, a beginning of the summer in our hemisphere. So what is the spiritual sense for this month? So what we're taught in Sefer Yetzirah is that the spiritual sense is called sight. Of course, it's not the regular sense of sight. So what does it refer to? The Hasidic masters suggested that it is our seeing with a good eye. Their focus was on our relationships to one another. So seeing with a spiritual good eye means to be generous in our interpretation of others. The Kabbalists suggested another way of relating to the spiritual sense of sight. And I would add that it's almost an impossible aspiration, but their way of looking at this is that we should see with different eyes, that we should not project our own, let's call it myopic view of what is being seen and experienced, because we not only speak the world into existence, we see the world into existence. Later this month, we will commemorate as part of a day of fasting, the remembrance of Moses descending from Mount Sinai on the 17th day of Tammuz and smashing the first tablets. What was the cause of Moses doing this? So we read in Shemot in Exodus, when the people saw that Moses was long in coming down, maybe tarrying from, if you remember, he was supposed to return after 40 days. So then they approach his brother Aaron and say, make a god for us. And Aaron forms the golden calf. So this is really a highlighting what it means to project. Often, why do we project? Well, we project sometimes out of fear because they were afraid that they had lost their leader. But in reality, he descended the very next while, and they recognized that their fear was unfounded. But that's often what we do. We project because of what we see, or even sometimes what we don't see. So, how do we work towards not projecting? If this is the goal of this month, to rectify our physical sense of sight by our spiritual sense of sight. So, might we suggest a very simple way to start this process is to close your eyes. Now, I'm not inventing this method. You may all be very familiar with the tradition that we cover our eyes as we say, Shema Yisrael. We're enjoined to take our hand and cover our eyes, or just close the eyes. So if the Shema is the most essential statement of belief, it would be fair to say that not seeing is believing. So I would like to ask you to just get comfortable in your seated position, or if you prefer to stand or even walk. But I am going to ask you to close your eyes. So I will provide just a few words of direction initially, and then trust you to enter your mindfulness practice as you see fit. During this sit, we're going to focus on our eyes, or more to the point, our mind's eye, and paying attention to all the golden calves we might be distracted by. So adjust yourself in your position, and first just gently close your eyes, or even if you would like, take your hand and place it over your eyes. And if you are taking your hand over your eyes, maybe just massage the outer sockets of the eyes. It's good to close our eyes sometimes, just to be so thankful for how much they work for us, how they take the world in for those who are sighted. And if there are amongst you those who are extraordinary in their sight, just to massage and recognize the beauty of the eyes, how they reflect who we are on the inside. And I would ask you to just close your eyes very tightly and hold them that way, just for another moment or two. And then release. And we're going to sit in silence, feeling our eyes, being grateful to them, and asking of them to not distract us. From our mind's eye. Check. And breathe in. And as you breathe in, breathe out, allow the breath to soften your face and particularly. And as you continue to breathe, focus on those. Let me add to the teaching that we started with. And for us to begin to appreciate what an idol is. What is the challenge of creating idols for ourselves? Because an idol is in contrast to our highest awareness of what God is. As God says to Moses, tell the people, this is my name. Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh, I will be who I will be. And an idol is just the opposite. The idol does not change. It is stagnant. And that is the most important thing for us to recognize in spiritual sight, is to not get stuck in our preconceived perceptions. That is what the Hasidic masters were also teaching us to say, look at people with a good eye. Don't just get stuck with who you see them to be in this moment, but to see who they could be. Who they will be. So as you continue to breathe in, start with ourselves. Start with what you need to release in terms of the stagnant idol of yourself. You can add to your meditation. Eya, Sheh, Eya, Sheh, Eya. Will be in. as you continue to breathe in, breathe in newness. And slowly, you can massage your eyes again, or just allow them to open gently. And come back into the world of sight and seeing. When you're ready with new eyes. And in honor of Pride Month, I wanted to leave you with a quote from Marcel Proust. The real voyage of discovery consists not in seeking new landscapes, but in having new eyes.
Thank you so much, David. Friends, we seal the practice as we do each day by offering an opportunity for those of you who are in mourning, observing your site, to recite the mourner's Kaddish, to put the name or names of those you are remembering today in the chat box now. Have to recite Kaddish. If you are not reciting Kaddish, please stay present for those who are. And thanks to Kat Esposito for holding our space today and sharing the words on the screen. And if you are reciting the Kaddish, I invite you to join me by rising in body or in spirit to recite the words together. You can unmute at this time. Yid Gadol, Dash B'mei Rabbah, Yama
Amen.
Amen. Friends, thanks for joining us today. If you're leaving us now, I hope you'll join us tomorrow. We'll be led tomorrow by Rabbi Dr. Mira Neshama Weil. Always a pleasure for us to have an opportunity to practice with Mira. And on Friday, Rebecca Schistler will be here to lead us to sit into Shabbat together. As always, you're invited to stay on. Questions and answers with just a conversation with our teacher for today, Dr. David Sanders of the Kabbalah Experience. I noted that I think for some folks, David, my eyes were closed, so I missed some of the chats. Some people were having a little bit of a hard time hearing some of you, I think, during the set. So maybe we'll have a chance to amplify some of what you shared at that point during the conversation. If you have a question you'd like to ask, please put it in the chat. If you'd like to just share a reflection on today's teaching or practice, you're welcome to do so. And if you'd like to just continue sitting with that good eye, the ayin tov, or the mind's eye, you're welcome to do that as well. So, oops, David, where'd you go? It's done. Cat, did we lose David? Um, all right. Well, hopefully he will return. Kat, if you're able to email David and invite him back. Otherwise, I will keep an eye. Thank you. Thanks for doing that, Kat. Hopefully David will be back and we can amplify. No, he knew we were going to speak, so I think he might have lost his connection. In any event, I'm happy to respond to questions, and also just to stay with this theme about what came up for me during the set. With these by way of association was actually the end of last week's Torah portion, Shlach Lecha, where we get the instructions about to affix tzitzit fringes to the corners of garments. It's where we get the tradition of tzitzit on the corners of the talit. And it's traditional after the Shema, when we close our eyes, to chant or recite these three paragraphs of the after the Shema, first of which is the V'ahavta, and the third of which is Vayomer, which is the passage from the book of Numbers. And in that passage, this is going to lead to the question I would ask David, which hopefully if he comes back, I'll be able to ask him. The passage says that we are to affix these fringes for ourselves and look at them and remember all the mitzvot of the Holy One and do them. V'lo tatura acharei levavchem, and not turn after our hearts, v'acharei einechem, and after our eyes, asher atem zonim achareihem, that we follow, so that we do not follow our heart and our eyes in our cravings. David, I thought it was, David's back. Good, excellent. David, let's add you here. Sorry, we lost you. You need to unmute. And then,
sorry.
Okay, that's okay. Glad we got you back.
Technology.
So I was so just to clue you in, I think some people had a challenging time hearing you during the meditation. So I wanted to try to lift up, maybe some of the things you were inviting us into. I was just talking about how the meditation and the teaching, I brought me to association to the section of the Torah at the end of last week's parsha about tzitzit. That are intended to we're intended to look at with our eyes, to remember not to follow the cravings of our hearts, or our eyes, not to be led astray by our eyes. So I appreciated this meditation that invited us to acknowledge the blessing of sight, and of course we also need to acknowledge that everyone is sighted, right? So we have to think about how to adapt that for those of us who are without sight or limited in our sight, but to contrast that with the mind's eye, or the ayin tov, the good eye that you were referring to. So I wanted to start there, actually, to invite you to just say a little bit more about, in Kabbalah, what is, and also you were inviting us to that eye, as I heard you, involves and represents our capacity to discern between idolatry and non-idolatry. So I wanted to invite you to talk a little bit more about that inner eye, that mind's eye, and the good eye, if those can be used interchangeably or not, or whether those are two different faculties. So is that a question there?
Yeah, absolutely. There was a beautiful
several questions. Yeah,
there's a few questions in there, but let's. I was trying to be mindful also of the fact that there are people who are not sighted in the typical way, whether born or become blind, or due to other factors have lost some or all of their sight.
Mhm.
And yet, this is a beautiful teaching from the Kabbalistic tradition that the Hebrew word for blind is iver,
Mhm.
ayin vav resh, which also spells the Hebrew word for skin, or. So there's a beautiful contrast that is taught between the Hebrew word or, skin with an ayin,
Mhm.
and the Hebrew word or with an aleph, light. So our faculty of physical sight sometimes blinds us to be able to see the aura, the aleph vavresh, the light, the energy that is within,
Mhm.
whether that's within ourselves
Mhm.
or within others. So when I teach this, there's a beautiful story of this little boy named Jacques Lussaran who becomes blind when he's 8 years old. And he had the ability to see before, of course. So he describes his attempt to try to see the world with his blind eyes, but he couldn't. But what he could see and began to see and cultivate was his inner mind's eye, his ability to see light. And as he describes it, energy
Mhm.
and color.
Mhm.
So he actually was able to develop this sense and sensitivity to seeing in a different way.
Mhm.
And I think that that's what I was trying to get at also to enjoin us. The thing about energy is that it's fluid. Once it stabilizes into something, physical and concrete, all the more so if we fashion it into a physical idol, right, a statue of some sort, then we have that sense that it just doesn't change. And that was the whole point of the notion that one should not, it's not just idols that we shouldn't worship, but we shouldn't worship, let's say, the sun,
Mhm.
because the sun, as was worshipped in Egypt, is a very static, reliable and static um, experience. But the Jewish tradition and the months is that we follow the moon. We follow the notion of change and how it and
Impermanence.
impermanence, and
Yeah.
how there's an evolution, and the moon is maybe not even the best example of that,
Mhm.
but it's still you know a sign for us to be really always in tune with our ability to change.
Yeah. It strikes me that vulnerability is a piece of this. When uh, if we are sighted and we close our eyes or cover our eyes, I don't know. I'll speak for myself. There is this uh, unease. There's some relief, but there's also unease in that it's taking away a defense. Um, a faculty that represents a defense, and so I'm thinking that, and also that worshiping that which is impermanent, in flux, unknowable, ever changing, constant and consistent in its unchanging unknowability is not an easy thing to do. Trusting that. It's easier to trust in, it's kind of easier to trust in the quote, the idol, the fixed thing that's knowable. You can see it, you can hold on to it. Um, you can try to manipulate it, maybe also even. So there's an attraction to the idolatrous, I think, for a sense of security. But the true security, and this is, I think we find it all over Jewish tradition, that this paradox, that true security is in being able to perceive and trust in that which seems insecure, like a sukkah, right? Seems like a very insecure, vulnerable, insecure place. And more, confronting our mortality or acknowledging mortality actually at first may feel threatening and scary, but actually leads to a deeper sense of trust. So,
Yeah.
so what do you say a little bit more about this know the seeing, the inner eye seeing? Is it perception? Is it consciousness? What do you in the meditation itself? What are we supposed to be doing? We're supposed to be saying, "Oh, there's an idolatrous thought. Oh, let go of that." What? How do you advise us to bring this into that practice in terms of moment to moment? How do we practice non-idolatry by exercising the inner eye?
Mhm.
Or how do you do it? I
Yeah.
guess it's really a
So
question.
Mark, thank you. And if you begin to notice, for you and for everyone else, to start, connecting the dots around this notion that we were developing about the distinction, as you're pointing out, between idolatry
Hmm.
and change and fluidity.
Hmm.
All right. So I want to answer your question, and also I'm seeing a lot of wonderful
Hmm.
posts here.
Hmm.
Um, so the quote was thankfully posted. That's why I had a problem, because I tried to post the thing in the chat and I got kicked off. So anyway, someone asked here, is this connected to the beginner's eye in the or beginner's mind in the Buddhist tradition? And the answer is, of course, we're trying to see things with new eyes. Right? So, um, so what do we do then in the meditation? Is to allow whatever sensations or thoughts come through, um, and just come back to the breath, come back to the feeling in the body. I was trying to, and I apologize if I wasn't talking loud enough, but to come back to the sensations actually in our eyes,
Mm.
and to recognize that these two are always changing and always fluid. In other words, I'm going to get practical, Mark, with
Yeah,
this,
that's fine. It's
and
great.
just say, I had a little issue um, in a relationship this morning, and the lesson for me to learn before I got on to do the meditation was, can you stop holding this person in your
Mm.
eyes in
Hmm.
just this way?
Right.
Because what you're doing is you're creating an idol.
Hmm.
I was creating an idol,
Hmm.
and the person was actually being very sweet to me, and I was like, yeah, but you weren't sweet to me when I wanted you to be sweet to me. And it's like, okay, you know and how easy it is for us to let go sometimes of those challenges with our children,
Hmm.
you know but it's not so easy to do it with our spouses, or our partners and our colleagues, and you know
Or ourselves.
and yes, and also ourselves. So we have to be able to come back to that ehya asher ehya,
Hmm.
the notion that I will be who I will be,
Hmm.
and grant that to ourselves and to others as well.
Hmm. Hmm. Well, thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing that. Thanks for sharing that. A lot of wisdom there, and I think it's really sort of core to this practice and core to Jewish practice because it allows for tshuva, right? Allows for change, right? If
Yes.
we didn't have that, if we were fixed, like that's the essence of Jewish practice is allowing for the essential nature of tshuva, of return, of coming back, of change, whether it's personal change or observing change in others. So I appreciate that. There's some practical questions.
Yeah, teshuva is one of the dots to be connected here, right? Because
Right.
otherwise we might mistaken and say, I'm sorry,
Hmm.
it's uvacha yochol kon. This
Hmm.
is a blemish that cannot be corrected. You can't
Hmm.
you can't undo anything that's been done. Like some people want to say, you can't unsee what you've seen. Well,
Mhm.
you may not be able to unsee it, but as Marcel Proust says, maybe you can see it with different eyes.
Yeah. Can you repeat the quote again? Other people were asking for that.
Um, yeah, someone
Mm.
actually was kind
Put
enough
it
to put
in.
it in the chat.
Oh, I missed that. Okay.
And it is, the real voyage of discovery consists not in seeking new landscapes,
There it is.
but in having new eyes.
Mm.
The book is called And There Was Light, and the author is Jacques Lucéron. That's a whole teaching. What a beautiful book and a beautiful person he was. He was just a very quick thing. He was involved with the French Resistance and wound up in concentration camp
Mm.
and survived.
Mm.
But definitely take a look at him. He's just a remarkable teacher. Even as a child, he was a remarkable teacher. But also, someone said, not being allowed to see God's face
Mhm.
during the Kohanim's blessings, we cover our eyes. Well, right, because through the hands of the Kohanim, the divine light is coming through, and we have to be careful about being overwhelmed by that. Isaac Luria, by the way, has a beautiful teaching. If when the Kohanim are doing this, I'm sorry. So they're holding their hands this way. We hold our hands this way,
Mm.
and it's just through that little aperture that we're allowing that light to come in. So this whole notion of letting light in and seeing things in a different light, that's really where all of this kind of connects.
It's beautiful. It's
Um,
beautiful. It's a
so
beautiful way
it's,
for us to move into the month of Tammuz too, David. Thank you
yeah,
for leading
I
us
love
there.
Rena's comment here. Eya Asher Eya idols. Beautiful.
Wow. Yeah.
And that's, I think, most of the questions.
Yeah. I think that's good. Okay,
All right.
David.
All right.
Want to
Thank you.
thank you for the beautiful teaching. Thanks for coming back, and thanks for you- all of it. It was all great. It was all great. So
All
we'll
right.
look forward to practice tomorrow with Mira and Shama One. We hope folks will join us, and with Rebecca Schisler on Friday. I put the link to another link to the Kabbalah experience in the chat before we close.
And
And
I would just add, Mark, that
yeah,
if there were questions, I'm happy to answer them, receive an email. So
okay,
I can be reached at Kabbalah Experience. It's david@kabbalahexperience.com.
good. Thank you. Thank you for that, David. All right. Thanks to Kat, and thanks to each of you for being here.